Today we're going to talk about some of the most commonly asked questions about becoming a military pilot in the United States. And I say in the United States because I don't know anything about foreign militaries. I'm asked often if I have information on other foreign countries, and I just don't. So these are questions pulled from the comment section of my videos, emails I've gotten, and most importantly, this was made for the Make Them Tell You No Facebook group, which is a group I created with the help of some fellow fighter pilots that are current military pilots or former military pilots to help answer your questions and mentor the next generation. So that's the intent of this video. Disclaimer: as a military officer, you're expected to take the initiative and do your own homework. So this is not an official source document. This is not official or sanctioned by any service or military, anything like that. This is just to try to help. And answers change. Sometimes information is outdated. So we try to get the best and most accurate information we could, but at the end of the day, it is incumbent upon you to make sure that the information is correct. So here we go. Military pilot frequently asked question. 3, 2, 1, flight off. So this is a PDF that I created with the help of several other members of the group, and you'll find it. I'll leave the link in the description to get to the group, but it's Becoming a Military Pilot Frequently Asked Questions. So you got a table of contents. You can select individually, but the About This basically is what I just said in the intro. This is not an official document. Use it at your own risk. So I'm going to go through this and explain it. So first of all, the name of the group is Make Them Tell You No, and people sometimes ask, what does Make Them Tell You No mean? And I like to use this quote from Shakespeare where it says, "Our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt." And what that means is sometimes we're our own worst enemy. We self-eliminate when we could possibly succeed. We tend to take the first bit of either criticism or the first bit of doubt and turn that into, well, I can't do it, so I'm not going to try. So Make Them Tell You No means don't tell yourself no, try. And if you find an answer in your request that says you'll never be a fighter pilot, keep trying, because there's waivers, there are other options available. And this is not just for being a fighter pilot or a military pilot, this is life in general. Keep pushing until the very final authority, the person that's actually in a position to make the decision, is the one that tells you no. So just keep pushing and don't give up. And that's kind of the mentality we use with the Make Them Tell You No group. First one, what are the general requirements to becoming a military pilot? Well, to become a military pilot, first of all, you have to become an officer. There are no enlisted military pilot positions. There are warrant officer positions in the Army, but that's it. There are no warrant officer flying jobs in the Air Force, Navy, or Marines. So you have to become an officer. In order to become an officer, you have to be between the ages of 18 and 39 years of age, which I'll talk about that for the flying section because it's different for that. You have to be a U.S. citizen. That's a very common question. You can't have dual citizenship or anything like that. You have to be a U.S. citizen, and that gets asked a lot. And that's part of the reason why, if you're from a foreign country, you're going to have to get citizenship before you even apply. You have to have a bachelor's degree from an accredited university. So it doesn't matter what it's in, it just has to be a bachelor's degree. And then sound moral character. So no felonies, no dishonorable discharges. You have to have a decent background. So the way you can get that is either if you're in high school, you have the options of applying to the academy, so a service academy, Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, etc. Or you can go through ROTC. So each college has that. You can go through that to get your degree and commission at the same time. Or if you get your degree, then you can go to officer training school, which is through a rated board, which will allow you to become a pilot that way. So you'll show up knowing you have a pilot slot and stuff like that. That's the general basics on the general requirements. We'll talk about some medical stuff here in a second. Will I have a pilot slot before I have a commit to the military? Well, you're going to find in this document there's a lot of answers of it depends. So in the Service Academy, no. You will be committed prior to even knowing you're going to be a pilot, because they've already spent the money to get you trained to become an officer, and they've given you that degree. ROTC, it depends, but typically you get in your junior year. So you're pretty much committed at that point. For OTS or OCS, which is the Navy version, or if you go Guard Reserve, yes, you will have your pilot slot prior to showing up to officer training school. So you get your pilot slot, you enter the pipeline, you do your medical stuff, and then you go to OTS for commissioning. So you already know you're going to at least get a shot at going to pilot training, assuming you get through those wickets. I don't have perfect vision. Can I still be a fighter pilot or any kind of pilot? Some of these things are interchangeable. I get this question so often. The most common myth is that you have to have 20/20 vision. And I'll talk Air Force and Navy because the standards are different. In the Air Force, you must be correctable to 20/20. That means some either LASIK or glasses. Your refractive error in any meridian cannot exceed +2 to -3 with no more than 3.0 astigmatism. And you can check the table here. Where we care about is the FC1. There is no distant vision uncorrected. You just have to be corrected, actually distant or near, you just have to be corrected to 20/20. So the whole myth that you can't wear glasses is just a myth. You have to be correctable to 20/20 and you have to be within the astigmatism and any meridian waivers or guidelines. However, there are waivers available. So even if you're not within this, if you get to the process, there are waivers potentially that can get you there. I have an astigmatism waiver. I've never worn glasses in my life. It worked out fine for me. So in the Navy, you must be 20/40 correctable to 20/20, and that's only for entry. Once you're in the Navy, you can actually, your vision can actually be worse than that. But so service group 1, once you're in the Navy, you're at service group 1, then you're 20/100, 100 correctable or better each eye and corrected to 20/20. But if you're an applicant for pilot training, you must have no less than 20/40 each eye correctable to 20/20 using a Sloan letter or the good light chart. Here's the limits, and you also have to have -1.5 diopters in any meridian, total hyperopia no greater than +3 diopters. So there are waivers available. I don't know how common they are in the Navy, but again, make them tell you no. All right, next question. Am I too old to start the application process? People, you know, I'm 28. Am I too old? I've actually had somebody ask me if they're 21 or 15 if they're too old. So without a waiver, 32 in the Navy at the time of commissioning. So you have to enter, you have to commission at age 32. So plenty of time if you're in your late 20s. In the Air Force, it is 33 because it's a current exception to policy service-wide. And then there are case-by-case waivers beyond that. So, I mean, I've heard of people in their early 40s even going, which boggles my mind, but hey, whatever. So, yes, there are waivers available, but the age limits are 32 and 33. Okay, next question. Does my asthma DQ me? And so at the end of this, I've got some links to the waiver guides. We try not to get too specific in medical questions because we're not doctors, and I'm not a doctor, and there's so many different, it depends, what if, and stuff. So we kind of took the most, I looked up the most frequently asked, and a lot of people ask about asthma. The bottom line is history of asthma is disqualifying. However, prior to the 13th birthday is waiverable. After age 12, so after the 13th birthday, waiver is not generally granted on initial flying physicals, but it just depends. So don't let that self-eliminate, but the general cutoff is the 13th birthday of whether you're symptomatic or asymptomatic and what you're doing. Do my allergies disqualify me? Yes, there's a waiver, and again, it's the verified history of allergic, non-allergic, and vasomotor rhinitis after age 12 unless symptoms are mild and controlled by a single approved medication. So it depends on your symptoms, it depends on what you're taking. There is waiver available, so you just can't take Claritin D or Allegra D, so you'll have to do something else. But it not necessarily is the answer to that question, but I've posted exactly from the waiver guide. Does my ADHD DQ me? Man, that's a newer one because of how likely it is. People are just diagnosed with ADHD so much these days. It does not necessarily disqualify you. A waiver is not required for candidates with a prior diagnosis of ADHD if they have not used medication, have not received special accommodations for occupational or academic performance in the last 4 years. There's waivers, but that's the current, you don't even need a waiver if you within the last 4 years have not used it. Okay, do my past misdemeanors disqualify me? People ask that a lot, and they usually mean like speeding tickets and stuff like that, maybe an alcohol-related incident. No, we're not a one-mistake military. You have to be honest and report them with assets. Really most applicable when you do your security clearance paperwork. Just be honest, don't hide anything, be truthful, and if it's asked in the interview, own up to it, and you made a mistake and you learn from it, and talk about how you learned from it. However, a felony or dishonorable discharge is disqualifying. So that there's a, misdemeanors okay, felonies, unless you can get it expunged or it's no longer on your record, that'll be a problem. Do I need flight hours or a private pilot's license? Well, the answer to that is not necessarily. It is a good thing to have on your resume. It shows that you've got an aptitude for flying. It shows that you're passionate and involved, but it is not a requirement. Especially for ROTC, the Air Force Academy, and active duty OTS. Not a requirement, just helps your pilot candidate selection method score. For some guard units, however, they do require sometimes minimum hours, and that just depends on the guard unit. A lot of fighter units that are more specific in their hiring standards do require it. So it just depends, but as a general rule, it is not required, it's just desired. Is my GPA too low? Your GPA must be at least a 2.5 or higher, but to be competitive, it needs to be a 3.0 or greater. There are exceptions, however. If you have a STEM, so like a math degree, physics, something like that, or if you have an engineering degree. So if it's a hard science or something like that, there's a little bit more leeway than if it's just like a liberal arts and underwater basket weaving and you could only get a 2.5. It's probably not going to look as good. What test scores are considered acceptable? So ASTB, we've had some people in the group post what they've done. For example, one of our candidates in the group said 55, 777, 3.4 in aeronautics, and he got picked up. But sometimes people with lower scores get picked up. AFOQT, typically you want to be in the 90s for pilot and nav. It just depends. PCSM score, anything above 85 is decent. Honestly, what you need to do is just study for the test, take the test, and I think you can study enough that you can do better, your second time around and get your scores up if you think it's going to be a factor, because scores do matter. Deuce, who's one of our guys from Wisconsin, said, it's a fairly common question. We at the 115th did a UPT board, got over 200 applicants, gave out 25 or so interviews. The ones that got interviews had a 90 plus PCSM, 90 on the pilot, 80 on the nav, 70 on the other AA quantitative and verbal scores do matter, but they're an objective way to weed down a large amount of applicants. So there you go. What college degree should I get? We talked about this a little bit a while ago. Doesn't matter what you get. It could be liberal arts, it could be underwater basket weaving, whatever you want it to be. Just realize science, hard science, math degree, STEM degree, engineering degree. If you ever think you want to go to test pilot school or NASA, though, that's where those are important. And that's one of my regrets for not doing that, because, it kind of limited. I would have loved to have gone to test pilot school or NASA or something like that, but, that's the thing. Am I too tall or too short? Currently, it is 5'4" to 6'5" with a sitting height of 34 to 40. However, they are currently changing the policy and doing case-by-case waivers, and they just put out an article which I linked to in here, airforce.mil. Don't let height standards get in the way. So just because you think you might be too tall or too short, apply anyway, because there's a waiver process and they have a team of experts who objectively determine if you're going to be too tall or too short. Is this Air Force active duty or Guard Reserve better? That's a whole video unto itself, but it depends. Active duty is more of a career path. You're less in control of your destiny. It is very rewarding. You get some stability in the fact that you're going to have a job for your career. And you're going to PCS, permanent change of station, every 3 years or so. The Guard, you show up to training knowing what you're going to fly. You have more flexibility to go get a civilian job if that's what you want to do on the outside. It's kind of a choose your own adventure. So what I would say is Guard is kind of the best kept secret. However, there's nothing wrong with going active duty, and it just depends on who you talk to. So we've got, you can read this more in depth, but It depends. I've been a reservist my entire career, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. How do I pick the aircraft I want to fly? Okay, so first thing you need to learn is needs of the Air Force, needs of the Navy. That's how it works. On the Air Force side, I'll start out with Guard Reserve. For the Air National Guard, Air Force Reserve, you get picked up by a unit, you fly whatever they fly. So if you get hired by the Makos in Homestead, you're going to fly F-16s and you're going to be based in Homestead. Or if you get picked up by like a C-17 unit, you know what you're going to fly. Doesn't matter. You just have to get the grades in pilot training. You can't be like the last guy in your class or girl who hasn't passed the check ride. You still have to make the grades, but you at least know what you're going to fly. On the Air Force side, you go, this is one of those things that the answers could change at any time, especially with UPT Next. But as it stands right now, you go through phase 1, which is academics and pilot training, and then phase 2, you go to the T6. From the T6, you track select. So they basically rank everybody based on flying grades, academic grades, commander's ranking, etc. And you choose. So you have your preference, and you go, well, I want to go fighter track, T-38s, or heavies, T1s. And based on your ranking and your preference will determine whether you go fighters or heavies or helos. What's available depends on needs of the Air Force. Sometimes you get large drops where it's a lot of fighters, and sometimes there's no fighters. Like when we had Split on the channel, he was at NJEP and they had no fighters, so he ended up in KC-10s. It's just needs of the Air Force. That's probably one of the drawbacks of active duty. For the Navy, so you go primary flight training in the T6. You submit your preference to the pipeline. The current pipelines are Strike, which is jets, E2C2, Maritime, which is P8s, EP3s, E6s, tilt rotors, and helicopters. It's based on your grades, NSS, and what's available, needs of the Navy. Once you go to Strike, you'll be sent to Meridian or Kingsville, complete both intermediate and advanced, gain your standard instrument rating, learn to fly in 2 and 4 ship formations, learn BFM, learn to qualify on the carrier, then you'll select whether you go Super Hornet, F-35, etc. E2C2's kind of an abbreviated process, and then Maritime E6 will go to Corpus Christi for a multi-engine syllabus. At the end of the day, needs of the Navy. So you are at the mercy of the military. So whether they have slots available or not, even if you do really well, they may not have slots, or they may have a bunch and you may be able to pick whatever you want. It just depends. This next one, I get this a lot, and it's what can I do to be a more competitive applicant? So I get the, well, I'm 12 years old, what can I do now? Or I'm in college, what can I do now? So I broke this down into high school and college. In high school, you get good grades. On your application, when you file your application for officer training school or whatever, they're not going to look at your high school GPA. It really doesn't matter. Although Delta does if you ever go apply for them, if the airlines ever come back. But what's important is good grades will help you get into a good college, and it shows that you've got a good study habit. And good grades can help you get into ROTC with a scholarship or get into a service academy. So even though it doesn't matter at the end, you definitely don't want to slack off. Get good grades. An ACT or SAT score, again, doesn't matter for the process, but it'll get you into a good college and set you up for success. So do well on those. Volunteering is important. I recommend the Civil Air Patrol. It is a great volunteer kind of paramilitary organization that has flight training ability. They do some search and rescue stuff. It is a very good organization to be a part of, and they can help you even get your pilot's license. So I recommend volunteering with the Civil Air Patrol that way, and that looks good on your resume as well. Athletics, it's not required, but team sports help. It helps you build that mentality of working with others, and physical fitness is important. So if you're not going to play varsity sports or anything like that, you still need to stay in shape, because you have to be in shape to do this job. But playing sports still will look good on your resume. I mean, it does help. In general, you might be able to get a sports scholarship to college. Since you're so young, basically all the options are available to you. Apply for ROTC scholarships, get the military to pay for your schooling, or apply to the service academies. All options are on the table. It's a good time for you. For college, GPA is important now. You have to do well. A 3.0 versus a 3.5 could be the difference depending on who you're competing against, so you absolutely want to do well. Study and prepare for the AFOQT, TBAS, ASTB, whatever you're going to take, do well. Take it again. If you do poorly, scores matter. Volunteer. So Civil Air Patrol is still an option. Volunteer organizations, do something that shows you're not just self-centered, that you can work with others. Get the flight time. I know we said it's not required, but it is desired, and it shows that you're into flying. So the more flying you can do, the better off you're going to be, and it'll help you when you're in pilot training, because it's not the first time. You won't have to go to IFT or IFS or whatever they're calling it now. Stay out of trouble. Like we talked about, not necessarily a career ender if you get into an alcohol-related incident or something, but it doesn't help. If you can keep your nose clean and stay out of trouble, you have a much greater chance of success. So just don't do drugs, don't do marijuana. Even though it might be legal in your state, it's still not federally legal. So best bet is just to stay away, at least for now. Start researching Guard Reserve units. That's something you might be interested in. That's how I got my start. I was a junior in college. I started calling up units, and I got a job as a student hire. So show your interest, start visiting. It's all about FaceTime with Guard Reserve units. So you definitely want to start researching it. And even if they don't want you to visit, at least you'll be prepared, and you'll know where to go, and you'll know kind of what the unit's about. So start doing your homework early. And like I said, join ROTC if it's available, because it's a good way to get a pilot slot, and they have a lot of pilot slots available. My recruiter is trying to talk me into applying for something other than pilot. Should I listen to him or her? First of all, make sure you're actually talking to an officer accessions recruiter. So strip mall recruiters that only deal with enlisted side of things have no idea about being a pilot and should not be the ones you're talking to. So if you want to be a pilot, apply to be a pilot. That's it. Make them tell you no. Don't get talked into, well, if you apply to be a WIZO, you might be able to later apply to be a pilot. That should be your first priority. How do I prepare for the FOQT or ASTB, TBAS, etc.? There's prep books. In the document above, we listed one, but we really don't recommend. I can't recommend specific test prep books. I can just tell you, go to Amazon. You'll find military aptitude test prep books that you can find. What do Air National Guards or Air Force Reserve units look for in an interview? Number one, don't be a douche. Number two, be yourself, unless yourself is a douche, and then you're probably not going to get a job anyway, but don't be a douche. We're looking for somebody that's hungry, confident, someone that's intelligent, knows when to keep their mouth shut, but also can, be social and have a good conversation. There's a lot of stuff in here, which I'm going to leave for either another video or this one, but the biggest thing too, attention to detail is important. So when they give you application instructions and they say they want it a specific way, do it that way. Don't try to be extra, because attention to detail is something they're looking for. So if they say they want their resume in a certain format, do it in that format. Don't put flower borders or whatever, or binders. Do what they say, because being a pilot is about attention to detail. When you go to these units, a gift to the bar is okay, although the way things are going, who knows how much longer that'll last. But if there are social events, make sure that you are responsible. Don't drink and drive. Don't get drunk to the point that you can't control yourself, etc. Just make sure you're making smart decisions, because you don't want to ruin your only chance. First impressions matter. So just make sure you're doing the right thing and being responsible. How do I find out what Guard Reserve units are hiring? GuardReserveJobs.com, bogeydope.com, and then units have web pages that you can find that they list them on, and also Facebook pages. That's pretty much the only ways I know, but those two sites are really good. Do I need to be a U.S. citizen to become a pilot officer in the U.S. Navy or Air Force? Yes. And you can't have dual citizenship, so you'll have to renounce one of them. But U.S. citizenship is required to be an officer. That's like USC. It's code. So, and that's like step one we talked about at the beginning. Do I have to enlist first? A lot of people confuse enlisting with joining. Enlisting means you're going to go be enlisted, so E1 through E9. You do not need to enlist to be a pilot. You can go straight off the street to officer training school or ROTC, etc. However, in some Guard Reserve units, it does help because it gets you FaceTime. Not required. Sometimes it's even the long way around, and it actually hurts your chances because you're missing out on opportunities. But it is not required, but sometimes it can help. And it can help pay for college too if you don't have another way to do it. Does color blindness disqualify me? Air Force, yes. The standard is 55 or better with each eye for all three cone types on the CCT. The only exception is mod, where the standard is 35. There are no waivers for color vision at this time, unless you're trained. then there's waivers. Navy, you must pass any of the 2 tests, and there's waivers or designated personnel with a change in color vision may be considered. So if it changes, you can get a waiver, but if you can't pass it initially, there's no waiver. So if you're colorblind right now, currently there's no waiver for that. Do I need LASIK? That's in the FC1 column at the beginning. If you're within the tolerances, you're eligible for a waiver without refractive surgery. Otherwise, so if you don't meet the waiver requirements that we talked about earlier, LASIK, you might be a good candidate. And if you're already in the military will pay for it. So we actually just had a case about that where we had an enlisted guy who's trying to get hired, and he actually had the Air Force pay for his LASIK. How do I get a waiver for a medical condition or exception to policy? Typically, that's going to be done for you, either by the officer exceptions recruiter and the medical personnel that are working your case, or it's going to be done by the unit. So it's not really something you do. The only thing I will say is, when they ask you for stuff, you have to go to a doctor to get documentation, or you have to provide something, just do it. Give it to them exactly as they ask for it, and that will help expedite the process and make it the least amount of pain for you and for them. And finally, my question is not here, what do I do? Well, look it up. Just make sure anything you look up is on a .mil or .gov website, so be careful about the information you're getting, especially some places like aggregate sites where it's just a blog or whatever. Those usually are wrong. Search the group. So on the Make Them Tell You No Facebook group, sometimes we've answered the question already. And finally, if you just don't know, ask. But make sure it's not something basic, because you're just wasting everybody's time and you're just showing that you're lazy if you ask a question that's already been answered. Helpful links. So facebook.com/groups, Make Them Tell You No is the group that I have. We don't make any money off of it. This is just us giving back. So there's no obligation or anything like that. I'm just trying to help. FlyingSquadron.com/forums. That used to be baseops.net. Actually, I think that's just the forum name for baseops.net. That's how I got my start. That's how I got all the information I did when I first started this whole process, so I highly recommend it. Bogeydope.com is a good one. They're military folks that usually, some of them actually even do interview prep, and they actually have a paid service where they'll help you. GuardReserveJob.com is a good place that lists units that are hiring and stuff like that. Make sure you're looking at UPT boards when you're doing this and not rated boards, because rated means you already have wings, so you're not eligible. Waiver medical guides. These are the .mil websites I was talking about. The first one is the USAF waiver guide, so that'll tell you, if you've got a specific medical condition, look at that and look at your symptoms, and then you can see. So instead of having to ask some weird question that's very personal, you can just look yourself. The second one is the Navy physical standards, and then the third one is the waiver guide, because they have 2 different documents. So anyway, at the end of the day, make them tell you no. Don't, even if it's not in here, if you got a no here, try anyway. I mean, it's free to try. It doesn't cost you anything, just your time, and it's worth it if you get a career being able to fly in the military in general, whether it's fighters, heavies, helos, any aircraft. I think military flying is some of the best flying in the world. So, but special thanks to Wombat, Ammo, Deuce, and GB for helping me out with this. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this helps. I really appreciate all the support, and I'm glad I'm able to give back. I never thought this channel would turn into this, but I'm glad if it just inspires one person to go get their pilot slot and save that platoon of Marines on the ridge line one day. I think this is all worth it, and I'm very thankful and honored to be able to have the opportunity to help out. So hope you enjoyed this video. Check out the Spectre Series box set if you haven't already, and I will see you on the next one. Excuse me. No. Oh! Been a lot of that. Usually fly with the doors off. All box too. Don't be a douche. That's rule number 1. Make them tell you no.